There is a peculiar silence that comes with age, not the comforting hush of a quiet house, but the kind that hums behind your thoughts, where once laughter and voices lived. I turned 70 today. 70. A strange number, neither young nor terribly old, but heavy with implication. I woke to a soft gray sky and a bed that felt too large. The side where Robert used to sleep remained undisturbed. Even 5 years after his passing, I still found myself reaching for him in the early morning haze, half expecting his warm hand to curl around mine. It didn't, of course. I got out of bed, slower than I used to, and went through the same routine I had followed since he died. Open the curtains, feed the birds, put the kettle on, wait, sip, repeat. There's a rhythm to solitude, a kind of quiet choreography that fills time when no one else does. By mid-morning, I had received 2 text messages. The first was from my son, Daniel. "Happy birthday, Mom. Swamped at work today. Let's chat this weekend." The second, from Eliza, my daughter, simply said, "HBD. No call, no card, no plans." I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the blue and white tiles Robert laid himself still gleaming, and reread those messages. I wish I could say I didn't feel anything, that their neglect no longer hurt me, but that would be a lie. I spent the afternoon baking a lemon cake. The house smelled like sunshine and sugar, and all the birthdays I had thrown for them when they were young, when a smile from me was worth more than 1,000 presents, when their small arms clung to my waist and they cried if I left the room. I had made this same cake when Daniel turned 7 and cried because the dog licked the frosting. I made it again when Eliza broke her arm and refused to eat anything else. They used to love this cake. I lit a single candle and whispered, "Happy birthday, Alice," to an empty room. I imagined Robert sitting across from me, his eyes crinkling with affection, his deep voice rumbling, "Make a wish, sweetheart." I smiled at the ghost of that moment and blew the candle out. The house creaked as the sun began to fall behind the trees. I ran a hot bath, poured in some lavender oil, and tried to pretend that the loneliness didn't ache deeper in my bones than my arthritis. That night, I fell asleep in my favorite armchair, the one with the knitted blanket over the back, the fire in the hearth reduced to soft embers, my tea cold beside me, and the photo album I had pulled down from the shelf resting open on my lap. It was the smell that woke me. Smoke. A thick, dark, bitter smell that burned my throat and clawed into my lungs. I coughed hard, eyes watering, as I blinked against the darkness. The lights were out, the room hazy. For a moment I was confused. Then I heard it, the crackling. Loud, violent, alive. Fire. I shot up, heart pounding, and ran toward the hallway. The air was dense, choking. Through the thick gray smoke, I saw the faint orange flicker coming from the kitchen. My house, burning. I grabbed the throw from the armchair and pressed it to my mouth, stumbling toward the staircase. The upstairs window, Robert had installed an emergency escape ladder years ago after a neighbor's house burned. I hadn't thought of it in years. My feet found the steps by instinct, though I could barely see. The heat was unbearable. I crawled the last few feet to the window, flung it open, and fumbled under the bed for the ladder. When I felt the cold metal in my hand, something inside me cracked, not with fear, but with fury. How had this happened? I climbed down slowly, gasping, my bare feet hitting the lawn hard. I turned back just in time to see the roof above the kitchen collapse inward, flames reaching high into the sky. The sirens came 10 minutes later. By then, the neighbors had emerged. Mr. Kellerman from next door handed me a blanket, his hands trembling. We saw the smoke. We thought, "Thank God you're okay, Alice." I nodded numbly, sitting on the curb in my nightgown, watching my life turn to ash. A firefighter approached me. He was young, earnest. "Ma'am, do you live here alone?" "Yes," I croaked. "Do you know how the fire started?" "No," I lied. because I did know. The front door had been unlocked. I never left it that way, not even in the safest neighborhood in the world. And earlier that week, Daniel had casually asked if I ever forgot to blow out candles. He had said it with a smile, but something in his tone had made me pause. And just 3 days ago, Eliza had texted, asking what insurance policy covered the house. She claimed it was for estate planning. They weren't questions. They were warnings. And now, as the house burned, I realized they were done waiting. They wanted the money, the land, the house, and they didn't want me in the way. It was arson. Of that, I was certain. Neat, quiet, almost merciful. If you didn't count the decades of memories, the handmade quilts, the black and white photographs, Robert's tools, his books, his clock, all gone. What they didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that they hadn't just tried to kill me. They'd started a war. And I had weapons they'd forgotten I owned. The deed to their apartment building sat in my bank safe. They had burned down my house. They had left me with nothing. But they had no idea, not yet, that soon they would be the ones with nowhere left to go. They arrived too quickly. Daniel pulled up in his black SUV barely an hour after the fire trucks left. Eliza's sedan followed 10 minutes later, gliding to a stop like a shark circling prey. Neither of them lived close enough for such urgency. Not unless they'd been nearby. Not unless they'd already known. I sat on a folding chair one of the neighbors had brought out, wrapped in a blanket, my hair still smelling of smoke. The house behind me was nothing now, just a blackened skeleton steaming in the dawn light. "Mom!" Daniel jogged over, arms out, all performance. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Eliza followed more slowly, adjusting her coat, her face already calculating. "This is awful," she said, glancing at the ruins. "Absolutely awful." I let them hug me, let Daniel squeeze my shoulder, let Eliza kiss my cheek. I didn't speak. I was watching. Too much concern, too much sympathy, too fast, too rehearsed. "How did this happen?" Daniel asked, crouching beside me like he was comforting a child. "I don't know," I said, voice flat. "It happened fast." "You didn't leave the oven on, did you?" Eliza's tone was breezy, but her eyes flickered sharp. "Or candles? You've always liked those little scented ones." I turned to look at her. "No," I said simply. She offered a tight smile. "Just checking." Daniel cleared his throat and rose to his feet. "Listen, Mom, this is horrible. And obviously you can't stay here. So Eliza and I have been talking." "Already?" I asked, eyebrows raised. He faltered, but recovered. "Yeah, I mean, we figured you'd need somewhere to go, just temporarily, while you sort things out." "We were actually thinking," Eliza cut in smoothly, "Sunset Pines. It's that lovely retirement community just outside town. Do you remember? We took you to their brunch last fall." I remembered. It was a thinly veiled sales pitch disguised as a Sunday meal. I'd barely finished my eggs before a woman in pearls handed me a brochure and asked if I feared loneliness. I told her I lived alone, not lonely. There's a difference. "I thought I'd stay with one of you," I said quietly. A pause. Daniel glanced at Eliza. Eliza looked at the sky. "Well," Daniel began, "you know our houses aren't really set up. For a long-term guest, I mean. Plus," Eliza added quickly, "with my kids in school and everything, it's just chaos. You'd be so much more comfortable somewhere quiet. Somewhere with people your own age." People my own age, that phrase. It always landed like a slap. I nodded slowly, as if considering it. "You've really thought this through." Eliza smiled, relieved. "Yes, exactly. We just want what's best for you." A red flag, that phrase. Always is. Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a folded pamphlet. Sunset Pines, a photo of smiling seniors in coordinated outfits on the front. "We already talked to the manager. They have a room ready, just for a few weeks." until the insurance kicks in and you figure out your next step. How thoughtful, I murmured, accepting the pamphlet without looking at it. Almost like you knew this was going to happen. Daniel laughed, too loudly. Come on, Mom. Don't be dramatic. I tucked the blanket tighter around my shoulders. What if I say no? Another pause. Eliza knelt in front of me, her voice soft but urgent. Mom, you can't stay here. And honestly, you shouldn't be alone right now. This is a blessing in disguise, a fresh start. Let someone take care of you for once. Her eyes were wide, practiced, persuasive. I nodded again. All right, I said. Both of them exhaled, visibly relieved. Daniel even patted my back. You'll love it, I swear, Eliza said. They have game nights, and a salon, and a shuttle to the mall. She said it like she was describing paradise. They loaded what little I had left, the emergency bag I'd kept by the door, some scorched documents the firefighters had salvaged, into Daniel's car. By the time we drove away, the sun was rising fully. It illuminated what remained of my home, black walls, smoke curling skyward like a question. I didn't look back. They thought I was broken, cornered, defeated. But I wasn't. I saw the matching stories they told, the convenience, the too-fast coordination. I saw through the concern. This wasn't compassion. It was containment. They wanted me somewhere they could monitor, manage, soften. Sunset Pines would be their cage, polished, perfumed, and padded. But a cage all the same. They thought I had nowhere else to go. What they didn't know? I wasn't walking into their plan. I was walking through it. Silently, watching, waiting, and remembering every word. They say that when you're cornered, your past comes calling. Mine arrived the night after the fire, in the quiet dark of the unfamiliar room they gave me at Sunset Pines. I lay on the plastic-covered mattress under thin institutional sheets, listening to the hallway clock tick like a slow metronome counting down the end of my freedom. I couldn't sleep. The sheets were too white, the silence too sanitized. And so I thought of Luke. Luke, my first husband. The man I loved before I knew what love cost. People like to pretend we become different people in our lifetimes, that who we were at 20 is gone by 70. That time rewrites us. But I never believed that. Not really. Time doesn't erase the past. It just buries it beneath more polite layers. My children never knew about Luke. Robert never asked. And I never told. But now, lying there in the nursing home bed they swore was temporary, I remembered everything. I had to. Because Luke taught me how to survive. I was 19, waitressing in a worn-down truck stop diner with grease-stained menus and a jukebox that only worked when you kicked it. I was the girl people called Darlin and didn't remember 10 minutes later. And then Luke walked in. He had a cigarette behind his ear, knuckles like hammered stone, and a scar that ran along his jaw like punctuation on a sentence he didn't finish. He didn't smile much, but when he did, it was with half his mouth. The other half always thinking, calculating, watching. He sat in my section, ordered black coffee and a plate of nothing. Just said, "Leave the menu." I like to read what I won't order. I told him that was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. He laughed. I married him 6 months later. He never pretended to be good. That was the thing with Luke. He didn't sell you a fantasy. He handed you the truth in its raw, ugly form and said, "Hold this. If you drop it, you're not ready for me." He'd been in prison, but he didn't talk about it. Not in specifics. Just said, "People mistake silence for shame. Mine's just strategy." We lived in the back of a garage he co-owned with a man named Rudy, who wore sunglasses at night and never smiled at me. Luke made money fixing cars, but sometimes he had more cash than the garage could possibly bring in. When I asked, he kissed my forehead and said, "Smart women ask the right questions at the right time. Right now, ain't it?" It should have scared me, and maybe it did. But I was young, angry, invisible, and Luke made me feel seen. He taught me how to read contracts, how to check the locks on every door, every night, twice. He taught me that names were like coats. You could take one off and put another on, as long as you had the paperwork. "You want to last in this world, baby?" he said once while drinking whiskey from a chipped mug. "You build things no one else can see. You put your name on nothing. You own everything." It was Luke who set up the shell company. We'd scraped together just enough money to buy a parcel of land 2 hours north of the city. Wooded, overgrown. Worth nothing then, but it had a creek and a view and no neighbors. He said we might build on it someday, maybe start over if we needed to disappear. But we never did. The marriage didn't last. Luke left after a fight that split my heart in two. He told me he was no good for me, that I had a softness he didn't want to poison. I told him to get lost. He did. The land stayed. Whispering Pines, LLC, a name that sounded like an inn from a Hallmark movie. All the paperwork was filed through a contact in Nevada. I never told anyone, not even Robert. Not because I didn't trust him, but because some lessons sink too deep to forget. You keep one piece of the world for yourself. Always. I had forgotten the land for years, decades. Life moved on. Robert happened, then Daniel, then Eliza, PTA meetings, birthday cakes, mortgage payments. The shell company became something I renewed once a year with a quiet check and a sealed envelope. Until last night, until the fire, until the house was gone and my children showed up too fast with their brochures and thinly veiled intentions. They had been waiting, preparing. I saw it now. The quickness with which Daniel offered to handle the paperwork. The calm way Eliza mentioned guardianship when she thought I was asleep at Christmas. The way they kept asking about the deed, how it was titled, where it was stored, what bank held the mortgage. I used to think they were just being curious. They weren't. They were casing the place like burglars who'd already made up their minds. And when the house went up in flames, they moved in like clockwork, with transportation arranged, with the Sunset Pines suite mysteriously available, with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They thought I was out of options, but they never learned what Luke taught me. They never knew about Whispering Pines. 47 acres, purchased for $12,000 in 1975. Now worth nearly 20 times that, maybe more. Untouched. Unclaimed by memory or mention. Hidden under the name of a company that doesn't even appear in my will. They think I am trapped. They think I have no teeth. They think I belong in this place with puzzles and pudding and monthly wellness checks. But I have land. I have a deed. I have the ghost of a man who taught me that when you feel powerless, you become your own weapon. And I plan to use every lesson he ever gave me. By the morning, I had a plan. Not a loud one, not a dramatic one, but a plan, all the same. Let them think I'm resting. Let them believe I'm docile. Let them walk the path they've set for me. And then let them fall into the hole I've dug at the end. Luke always said, "Keep your powder dry, sweetheart. Someday you'll need it." Well, that day was coming. They call it quiet hour at Sunset Pines. From 2 to 3 p.m. The halls go still, the overhead lights dim slightly, and a classical music station hums through the speakers like a lullaby no one asked for. The residents nap or pretend to. The staff lowers their voices, and the whole place takes on the hush of a church right before a funeral. That's when I began to study. Not books, people. The nurses, the aides, the other residents. Who lingered too long at the doors, who gossiped in the corners, who thought no one was listening. People forget the elderly know how to watch. We've been watching our whole lives. I made mental notes in silence, like Luke taught me. Which aide always checked her phone when she thought no one saw? Which resident faked her dementia just enough to be left alone? Which staff member's keycard opened the medication cabinet with a passcode scrawled carelessly on the back? They underestimated us here. Assumed age dulled everything. But my mind was sharper now than it had been in years. Grief, betrayal, and vengeance have a way of clarifying things. Within 3 days, I had memorized the staff rotations. I knew which night nurse watched old westerns on her phone behind the front desk. I knew the security guard slept in the supply closet from 3 to 4 a.m. Sunset Pines ran on routine. And routine is how you find the cracks. I made my first call during tech time, one of the weekly hours when residents were allowed to use the office computer or request help with their phones. I pretended I'd forgotten my email password. When the young aide went to ask for help, I opened the browser and typed 3 names: Martin Reynolds, Robert's old attorney, discreet, intelligent, a man who once told me over tea that a strong estate plan is the last gift you give to the living. Cal Beckett, a firefighter I'd met at a community fundraiser 2 years ago. He helped install smoke alarms in my attic, flirted a little, told me to call him if I ever needed to get something off my chest. Dora Linwood, former police officer, retired after a back injury. She'd been in my garden club before her divorce. Once told me she could spot a liar by their silence. All 3 had something I needed: knowledge, loyalty, and a healthy distrust of easy explanations. Martin still had his office in town. Cal worked 2 stations over now. Dora had moved out of state but kept a local number. She picked up on the second ring. Dora, it's Alice Parker. Alice? Oh my God. I saw the news. The fire. Are you all right? I kept my voice steady. I'm fine, but I need to ask you something. Off the record. Go on. And just like that, I began pulling the threads. I asked her to check into the fire report, unofficially. I wanted to know what cause they'd listed. I also asked her to find out if either of my children had called emergency services the night of the fire, and if not, why they'd arrived at the scene so quickly. She didn't ask why I was suspicious. She just said, "Give me 2 days." Cal met me for coffee at the recreation center attached to the retirement home. I requested a visitor pass for a family friend. He arrived wearing jeans and a Henley, carrying a bouquet of white roses like we were on a date. He hugged me tight. When I saw the photos on the news, I almost drove straight there. They said it was probably an accident. You know, old wiring. They always do, I said. He raised an eyebrow. But you don't buy it. No, I replied. And I need someone to tell me what really happened. I'll see what I can find out. You're not the only one who thinks something smells funny. As he left, he winked. Next time, ask me for dinner instead of dirt. Martin was harder to reach, but not impossible. I left him a voicemail and he called back that evening. Alice, he said, his voice low, urgent. What are you doing in Sunset Pines? I thought your house. Wait, that's why you're calling? Yes. Do you want to move forward with the change we discussed last year? I smiled. Martin had always known I was cautious. 2 years ago, I asked him if it was possible to transfer ownership of Whispering Pines to a trust, one with no discoverable link to me. He set up the paperwork and left it unsigned. Not yet, I told him. First, I need to know what the kids are planning, and I need to look like I've surrendered. There was a pause on the other end. Then, with a little awe in his voice, he said, You haven't changed one bit. Thank you, he laughed. That wasn't a compliment. By the end of the week, I had more than a plan. I had a team, a lawyer with a vault of secrets, a firefighter with access to reports and evidence, a former cop who could read between the lines better than anyone. My children had placed me here like a pawn they thought was off the board, but pawns are only useless if they stay still. Move them right, and they become queens. Let them underestimate me. Let them smile politely and ask about bingo and bridge club and memory care. Let them believe the fire was forgotten and the ashes scattered. Because soon, very soon, I'd light a fire of my own, and this time it would be aimed exactly where it belonged. The first proof came from Dora. It was a Tuesday morning. Rain tapped softly against the windows of Sunset Pines, and the rec room smelled of cinnamon oatmeal and Lysol. I was pretending to knit, a scarf I had no intention of finishing, when the receptionist tapped my shoulder. "Alice, you've got a visitor." She handed me a manila envelope with no return address. My heart beat faster. I waited until I was back in my room to open it. I shut the door quietly, pulled the shades just enough to keep wandering eyes out, and sat at the small writing desk beneath the framed photo of tulips. Inside the envelope were three things: a fire report, a copy of a building permit, and a screenshot from the County Land Registry website. I read them twice, then a third time. Then I folded my hands and breathed. The fire report was brief: suspicious origin, no accelerants found, but the point of ignition had been determined to be inside the electrical panel. That was on the opposite side of the house from where I'd seen the first flames. Dora had circled that in red ink. She'd also added a sticky note: panel was updated in 2019. Shouldn't have failed, especially not like that. That alone was suspicious. But the second document gutted me. Filed 3 days after the fire, an application for a commercial building permit, submitted by a limited partnership that Daniel and Eliza had formed 1 week before the fire. They had called it Ashwood Commons, LLC. The address listed for the proposed business site? Mine. My burned home. My land. Eliza had even signed the permit application herself. I read her name slowly, as if it might vanish if I blinked, as if this was still some mistake. But it wasn't. The third document confirmed what I feared. Whispering Pines, the shell company that owned the land upstate, had been flagged for zoning inquiries by a third-party contractor. Not official, but nosy, curious, someone asking questions, someone who thought it was just a matter of time. Dora's second note said, "Someone's trying to trace the land ownership, likely Eliza, but she's hit a dead end. For now." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat upright in the bed, the envelope of documents on my lap, the rain still falling. Everything felt colder. I thought of Eliza as a girl, 10 years old, barefoot on the kitchen tiles, asking for one more cookie before dinner. I thought of Daniel, crying after his first breakup, hiding under a blanket on the couch, letting me hold him even when he swore he didn't want to be touched. They had been mine. Now they were strangers. And worse, they were thieves. But I still didn't know the why. It wasn't until Friday that Cal brought the rest. He came again, this time without flowers, just a tired look and a manila folder under his arm. We met on the walking path behind the building, the one no one used because it didn't lead anywhere. He handed me the folder like it weighed 50 pounds. "I pulled what I could from a friend in finance," he said. "Off the record." Inside, loan defaults, overdue taxes, late credit card payments, and a rejected application for a small business grant. Daniel and Eliza weren't just greedy. They were drowning. Ashwood Commons was supposed to be their way out, Cal said. They filed all the paperwork for a boutique wellness center. Yoga, juice bar, co-working space, very trendy. I snorted. On my land? Cal nodded. They needed capital, bad, and the insurance payout was their down payment. I stared at the papers in silence. They didn't just want to move me out, I said at last. They wanted to erase me, burn the house, collect the insurance, build on the ashes, and pretend I never existed. It's worse than that, Cal said gently. They submitted your name on the original permit. As the landowner, my head snapped up. I never signed anything, I hissed. They forged it, Alice. Silence stretched between us. The wind rustled the dry leaves, and far off, a bird called once, then went quiet. I looked down at my hands. They didn't shake. They're going to get exactly what they wanted, I said after a long pause. They just don't know it yet. Cal arched an eyebrow. You're letting them win? No, I said softly. I'm letting them think they already did. Back in my room, I pulled out the last piece of the puzzle, the Whispering Pines deed. It had stayed hidden for decades, tucked between pages of a cookbook no one would ever open. The land was untouched, the paperwork clean, the ownership buried, but not for much longer. Because I had seen enough. Now it was time for them to see what it feels like when the ground you stood on, smug, certain, secure, crumbles beneath you. To see what happens when the woman you thought you buried comes back with a ledger full of receipts and a matchbook in her hand. And I wasn't going to burn quietly. They burned down my house. They left me in a nursing home. They thought I was a ruin, but I'm not a ruin. I'm the fuse. And they just struck the match. The first time I saw Jonah, he was carrying 3 bags of mulch and a sack of birdseed, like it was nothing. He had the kind of smile that came easy, not the oily kind people wear when they want something, but the genuine, open kind that belongs to someone who still believes in building rather than taking. He was visiting his mother, Eleanor, who lived 2 doors down from me at Sunset Pines. She was 93, nearly blind, but sharp as a tack, and more than happy to share everyone's business if you brought her ginger snaps. Jonah, she said one afternoon, waving a bony hand as I passed her open door. Come meet Alice. She's new here, but I suspect she's got stories. He stepped into the hallway, wiping his hands on his jeans. Nice to meet you, ma'am, he said, and I almost laughed. Don't call me ma'am, unless you're planning to rob me. He grinned. Yes, Alice. We got to talking. He told me about growing up nearby, about helping his grandparents run their roadside vegetable stand, how it had all but disappeared after the highway bypass was built. People don't stop for tomatoes anymore, he said with a shrug. He worked now as a handyman and part-time gardener, but what he really wanted, and I could hear it in the way his voice softened, was to open a farm shop. Not just produce, he said, eyes bright. Jams, bread, fresh eggs, flowers, something that smells like real life. It was the kind of dream people stopped having after enough disappointment. But Jonah hadn't let go. He told me he'd been saving, but land was too expensive. Investors wanted condos, not carrots. I found this one lot I loved, he added. But someone already filed a development permit. Gutted me a little, honestly, was perfect. Big, open, wild, but not too wild. You know? He said the address. It was mine, my burned house, my dead garden, my land. I stared at him. Jonah, I said slowly, what if I told you the people who filed that permit didn't actually own the land? He blinked. Then I'd say someone committed fraud. I smiled. I'd say someone made a mistake. I invited Jonah to coffee in the rec room the next morning. We sat by the window as the sun filtered through the blinds, catching flecks of dust in the air like gold. I want to give you the land, I said, plain and simple. He blinked. I'm sorry? My land, I repeated, where the house was. I don't want to rebuild, but I want something new to grow there, something honest. I don't have that kind of money. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for intention. I've got paperwork showing I still own it, and I'm about to make it very public that any other claims were forged. He was quiet for a long time. Why me? I could have lied. Said it was fate, said it was kindness. But I was done with lies. Because the people who tried to steal it from me are my children, and they were going to use it to build something soulless, a wellness center for rich people, a hollow, glittering shrine to nothing. I want to bury their plans in something real, something living. Jonah nodded slowly. I'll need help. I've never run a business. You won't be alone, I said. He smiled again, slower this time. I don't know what to say. Say you'll grow something worth remembering. He looked down, then up again. Then I will. By that afternoon, I had contacted Martin. I want to transfer the deed, I told him, not to a company, to a person, someone I trust. Martin's voice was quiet. Are you sure? I've never been more sure. But I want the filing public. I want it to hit the local register like a thunderclap. He chuckled. Subtle as always, Alice. Subtlety is for people who aren't being erased. He agreed. The paperwork would be filed within 72 hours, and with it, the house of cards Daniel and Eliza built would start to collapse. Because once Jonah's name was on the deed, their fraudulent permit would become more than an embarrassment. It would become a legal liability, and any attempt to stop him would drag their lies into the daylight. The land would never be theirs, and the dream they tried to build on ashes would wither before it took root. That night, I walked the quiet hallway of Sunset Pines alone. I paused by the front doors, looking out at the stars. It was clearer than usual. Cold, sharp, beautiful. Robert would have held my hand. Luke would have raised a glass. And me? I just stood there, thinking about seeds, about how fire clears the forest, makes way for the wildflowers that slept too long beneath the surface. I was done sleeping. Tomorrow the paperwork would go through. Tomorrow the first stone would fall, and from the ashes of the house they burned, a garden would rise, one I did not build for them. The staff at Sunset Pines were used to gentle scenes, shaky hands and goodbyes, grandchildren in pastel cardigans, soft apologies about moving across the country, the rustle of goodbye balloons and supermarket bouquets. But no one was prepared for what arrived that Thursday afternoon. Daniel's BMW screeched to a halt in the visitor lot like a bad omen. Eliza stepped out of the passenger side before the engine had even shut off, slamming the door with more force than a woman in Chanel should have been capable of. They stormed across the courtyard in lockstep. A performance, not a visit. I saw them coming from the garden, where I was pruning dead blooms off a stubborn hydrangea. I didn't rise. I didn't even turn. Let them come to me. Let them feel the weight of that silence. Mom, Daniel barked. We need to talk. Now. Eliza followed a step behind, jaw tight, voice just as cold. How dare you give away the land? How could you humiliate us like this? I turned to them slowly, setting down my shears on the stone bench beside me. My hands were dirty, my sun hat tilted back just enough to cast a long shadow across my eyes. You seem upset, I said mildly. Is this about the crime you committed, or the fact that someone else noticed? Daniel's face flushed instantly. You're overreacting. We were trying to save something, build something for the family. No, I said, standing. You were trying to build something on top of me? They exchanged glances. Eliza took a step forward, lowering her voice. That land was wasted, Mother. It was sitting there, undeveloped, costing money. We were trying to protect your legacy. I chuckled. Protect it by burning down my house? By submitting an insurance claim within 48 hours and filing a permit for a wellness spa you planned weeks in advance? Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't understand the financial pressure we're under. Oh, I do, I said sharply. I've seen the loan defaults, the denied business grants, the fact that you leveraged your lives against a dream you could only fund by stealing mine. Silence. I didn't raise thieves, I said quietly. But somehow, that's what I got. You raised entitled children, Eliza hissed. You spoiled us, and now you're shocked we expected something in return. I stepped forward, close enough to see the fury flickering in her eyes, and the fear beneath it. You expected my death, I said. You planned your empire around my absence. You stood in the ruins of my life and saw opportunity. And you forgot one thing. Daniel narrowed his eyes. What? I'm still here. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. I wasn't going to tell you this today, I said, pacing slowly along the stone path. But now seems appropriate. I turned to them fully. You know that duplex you're living in? The one with the cute garden and the rooftop patio you show off on Instagram? What about it? Eliza asked warily. I own the land it sits on. The silence that followed was exquisite. That's impossible, Daniel whispered. The management company owns that property. Number they lease it. From me. Through a trust Robert and I created in 2008. A quiet investment buried under a dozen LLCs. You've been paying rent all these years. Indirectly, to your mother. Eliza looked like someone had slapped her. And leases, I continued, can be changed. Rent can go up. Lease terms can be revoked, especially if the tenants engage in illegal activity, like insurance fraud. Daniel took a shaky step back. You wouldn't. I would, I said. And I am. You'll destroy us, Eliza said quietly, her voice cracking for the first time. No, I replied. You already did that. I'm just delivering the bill. They were silent then, both of them. The fury had drained from their faces, replaced by something colder, fear. I want you to listen carefully, I said. This is not about revenge. This is about justice, and justice has interest. For every lie, every forged document, every manipulative text you sent while pretending to check in on me, I will respond. And I won't do it in rage. I'll do it in paperwork. Daniel opened his mouth again. I didn't let him speak. I've already notified the county. The permit's invalid now that the land belongs to someone else. The insurance company is reviewing the claim. I've provided them with signatures, timestamps, emails, and testimonies. And Martin, he's preparing to pursue damages on my behalf. Eliza reached for me, suddenly desperate. We didn't mean to hurt you. You meant to replace me, I snapped, with a yoga center and a juice bar, with a spreadsheet and a building named after yourselves. But people don't disappear just because they're inconvenient. They stood there like children who'd just been caught stealing from the till. I brushed past them and returned to the bench, picking up my gardening shears with careful fingers. This is only the beginning, I said softly, almost to myself. They left without another word. I watched them from the garden, their silhouettes growing smaller as they stormed across the lawn and back to their car, the very ground beneath them no longer theirs. The sun came out then, warm on my back. The hydrangeas, though still bare, were beginning to bud again. And so was I. I wanted them all there, not just Daniel and Eliza, but everyone. The ones who had asked too few questions, the ones who quietly benefited, the ones who watched the fire from a distance and assumed I'd simply vanish. So I sent the invitations myself. I didn't call, I didn't text. I mailed handwritten cards, cream-colored, thick stock, with my name printed boldly at the top. Alice Parker requests your presence for a family gathering and formal announcement. No further details. I booked the community room at the Old Town Library, the one where I used to take Daniel for story time, where Eliza had once stood on a chair at age 7 and recited an entire poem by heart. The irony was delicious. When they arrived, Daniel in his stiff gray suit, Eliza in beige cashmere, their children trailing behind in confused politeness, I greeted them with a smile that gave nothing away. The room was quiet. No music, no distractions, just a long table, 12 chairs, and a teapot already steeping. I suppose we're celebrating something, Eliza said coolly, eyes scanning for champagne. In a manner of speaking, I replied. I waited until they were seated, waited until even the most distant cousin had arrived, the once-a-year relatives who never called but showed up for anything that smelled like inheritance. When the door closed, I stood. I'm glad you're all here, I said, my voice clear. It's time we had a conversation. Not about the past, not really, but about the present, about who I am and who you've become. Murmurs rippled. I placed a stack of files on the table, each bound in navy blue with white tabs. Evidence, not anecdotes. Let's begin with what you already know, I said. You know my house burned down. You know I was moved, quickly, into a nursing home. You know, or you suspect, that Daniel and Eliza have taken charge of my affairs. I looked them each in the eye. What you may not know is that the fire wasn't an accident. Gasps. A stunned silence. I turned toward Daniel and Eliza. The fire was staged. The insurance claim was filed less than 48 hours later. And before the fire had even finished smoking, a building permit had already been submitted for a wellness center, a luxury spa, on the same land where I once grew tomatoes, on the grave of my memories. Daniel stood abruptly. You have no idea what you're talking about. I raised a hand, and the room quieted again. Oh, but I do. I opened the first folder. Inside, the fire marshal's report, the permit application, time-stamped emails between Eliza and the developers, dated a full week before the fire. Your names are on every document, your fingerprints on every file. You forged my signature. You filed permits in my name. You tried to erase me and build your empire on my ashes. Eliza's voice trembled. We were trying to help. You didn't need that land anymore. No, I snapped. You didn't want me to need it. I let that sink in. Then I lifted a second file. This, I said, is the deed to the land under the Everhart duplex, the one you both live in, the one you've bragged about owning for years. They both froze. I bought it in 2008 through a private trust. You've been living on land I own and leasing it at a symbolic $1 per year. Out of love, out of generosity. That lease ends today. Daniel's face drained of color. Eliza whispered, That's not legal. It's perfectly legal, I replied, and entirely justified. I turned to the rest of the room. You've all heard versions of this family. Stories about me, the sweet mother, the forgetful widow, the woman who burned toast and got confused. That's the woman they wanted you to believe in. A liability, an obstacle. I took a deep breath. But here's who I really am. I am Alice Margaret Parker. I was married to 2 men, both of whom I outlived. I raised children who forgot how to honor sacrifice. I survived cancer at 52. I taught myself how to invest, how to write contracts, and how to bury assets where greedy hands couldn't find them. I walked slowly around the table as I spoke. For the past 20 years, I maintained ownership of 5 parcels of land under 3 separate names. I paid the taxes. I renewed the trusts. I signed nothing I didn't understand. Eliza had begun to cry. You thought I was weak, I said. You thought you could build a future on my bones. But you forgot something. I turned back to the head of the table. I am the root. You are the branches. And now, I'm pruning. The silence was suffocating. Effective immediately, I said. You may either begin paying market rent, or you may leave. The choice is yours. But the days of symbolic gestures are over. The days of unearned inheritance are done. I looked at their children, my grandchildren, who sat frozen, caught between blood and truth. This isn't punishment, I said gently. This is reality. Then I poured myself a cup of tea. No one moved, not even when I lifted the cup and took a sip. I won't be erased, I said softly. Not by fire, not by silence, not by you. Then I stood, gathered my files, and walked out of the room without looking back. They had tried to write my ending, but I had just begun the next chapter. They didn't call, they didn't text, they showed up. 3 days after the library confrontation, Daniel and Eliza came to Sunset Pines. No announcements, no dramatics. Just 2 children dressed in weathered jackets and expressions worn thin by fear, shame, and something I hadn't seen in years, humility. I was in the greenhouse, pruning the herbs while the last of the autumn sun slanted across the panes. I saw them outside, standing awkwardly by the bench, like children waiting to be called into the principal's office. Daniel had lost weight. Eliza's hair, usually meticulously styled, hung limp and tied back. No makeup, no smiles. I let them wait. I wasn't being cruel. I was being exact. Eventually, I opened the door and stepped onto the gravel. "Back again," I said, not unkindly. Daniel cleared his throat. "We're not here to fight." "We're not here to justify anything either," Eliza added. "We know we crossed every line." I raised a brow. "Which one are you apologizing for? The arson? The forgery? The insurance fraud? Or the part where you tucked me into a nursing home and tried to erase my existence?" They both flinched, and neither replied. Good. I folded my arms and waited. Finally, Daniel spoke. "We want to accept your terms. All of them." My silence was the permission he needed. "We've already contacted the insurance company to reverse the claim," he said. "We'll return the money in full. And the permit application has been withdrawn." Eliza stepped forward, voice steadier than I expected. "We'll write the letter, the full confession, for the family, and we'll sign it publicly." I nodded once. "You'll also pay market rent on the property under your homes, effective immediately. The management company has already updated the lease contracts. I've made sure of it." Daniel nodded. "Understood." "You'll pay for my care here," I continued, "not because I can't afford it, but because I shouldn't have to." "We will," Eliza said quietly, "and we'll visit, every week, not just to check a box, to rebuild, if you'll let us." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I studied their faces, truly studied them. There was no trace of the smug certainty that had followed them into every room for the last decade. No calculated smiles. No eyes darting to assess what they could still gain. What I saw now was two people stripped down to their last human pieces. They weren't whole, but they were, finally, honest. "You don't rebuild trust," I said softly. "You earn it back, one brick at a time." Daniel looked down. "We know." Eliza swallowed hard. "We're sorry, Mom." For the first time, the words didn't sound like theater. I nodded. "Then let's begin." Later that day, I returned to the bench behind the greenhouse. Jonah was already there, sleeves rolled to his elbows, dirt under his nails. The man who had helped replant not just the land, but something inside me I thought had long since died. He looked up as I approached. "How'd it go?" "They bent," I said. "Not because I forced them, because they finally saw what they did." Jonah nodded. "And you believe them?" "I believe in consequences," I replied, "and in follow-through. But I also believe in course correction." He leaned back, resting his arm on the bench behind me. "The story's gone viral," he said with a soft smile. "You're being called the widow who won. People are rooting for you. A reporter from the Times wants to do an interview." I laughed. "I don't need a headline. I need a garden that doesn't burn." He tilted his head. "And what about us?" I turned to him. United States. He'd been patient, gentle, never pushing, just offering. Space, presence, a hand on the shoulder when my own trembled in secret. He'd been what my late husband Robert had once been, before the world got heavy. A good man with dirt under his nails and enough heart to plant things in broken soil. "I told myself I didn't believe in second chances," I said. "Not for family, not for love, not for me." "And now?" he asked. "Now," I whispered. "I think second chances aren't given. They're grown." He smiled, wide, real, warm. "So you're saying I can stay?" I reached for his hand. "I'm saying I've got room in my garden." We sat there until the sun dipped low. A grandmother with dirt on her palms, a man with dreams rooted deep, and a world slowly setting itself right. One truth, one act of justice, one seed at a time. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was cultivating something no fire could touch. It was still cool in the mornings, the kind of April air that bites a little but promises warmth by noon. The dew clung to the wild grass around the edge of the old property, mine, once again, and more alive now than it had ever been. Every morning for the past 2 weeks, I arrived just after sunrise and watched them build. Not Daniel and Eliza, though they came later, in the afternoons, when guilt could no longer disguise itself as busyness. No, it was Jonah's crew I watched. 3 young men and 2 women, all strong-backed and soft-spoken, hammering, sanding, measuring, laughing. There was something ancient in it, the way they moved, like they were raising a barn, not a store, as if they were making something sacred. And perhaps they were. The storefront began with reclaimed wood from an old schoolhouse, a wide front porch lined with mismatched rocking chairs, and window panes ordered from a local glassmaker who still etched initials into the corners. Jonah didn't want sterile or slick. He wanted honest. "It should feel like someone's grandmother might bake bread in the back room," he said one morning, holding up a rusted weather vane shaped like a chicken. I mean, if the grandmother was terrifying and brilliant. I raised an eyebrow. "I accept," I told him, "on both counts." Helping brought me back to life. I didn't just fund the store, I became part of its bones. I helped paint the sign, picked out tile for the floor, ordered jars for the preserves, and drafted vendor lists with the tenacity of a hedge fund manager. Jonah wanted local only. I respected that. We met with soap makers, jam producers, flower growers. They came to Sunset Pines to pitch their ideas, sometimes nervously, as if they weren't sure who I was or why I was sitting in the corner with a notepad and a gaze sharp enough to peel paint. "I'm Alice," I'd say, "and I'm old, not dead. Show me what you've got." They always laughed, and they always left with a contract. One afternoon, as the main shelving was being installed, I stood alone in the store's frame, a hollowed-out shell waiting to be filled. I looked out across the land where my home once stood. The house, the lilac bushes, the porch where I used to sit with a book, all gone. But the earth remained. The same dirt that had grown tomatoes and basil and strawberries for Daniel's school lunches was now sprouting something new. The fire had taken the walls, yes, but it had not taken the root. Nothing ever really dies in a place that remembers you. And this land remembered me. My children came. Not every day and not with fanfare. But they came. Eliza brought plants for the windowsills. Daniel carried crates from the car. They made conversation with the staff. They asked questions about supply chains and vendor pricing. They helped. At first, they did it like penance. But slowly, quietly, they began to do it with care. They even helped me dig the herb garden behind the building. Eliza wore gloves far too expensive for the job. Daniel tried to pretend he remembered how to hold a shovel. They laughed at each other and, eventually, laughed with me. I didn't forget what they had done, but I allowed myself to see who they were becoming. That was the point of justice, not just to punish, but to clear the path for something better. And now, they were under my wing again, not coddled, not trusted blindly, but included, like a garden patch given a second chance. Opening day came on a Saturday. People started showing up an hour before the ribbon cutting. Locals, reporters, even old classmates of Eliza and Daniel, now pushing strollers and sipping coffee from travel mugs. They all wanted to see the miracle store, the one built by the widow who refused to burn. The story had gone everywhere. Headlines called me a quiet legend, a survivor, a businesswoman, a matriarch. They missed the point. I wasn't a symbol. I was a person who had been wronged and had refused to stay quiet in the aftermath. I stood beside Jonah, dressed in navy with my silver brooch. My cane rested nearby, though I didn't need it that day. When I cut the ribbon, the crowd clapped and whooped, but I didn't smile until I stepped inside and saw what we had made. Baskets of fresh bread, lavender hanging from the rafters, locally made candles lined up like tiny treasures, a wall of preserves, raspberry, peach, plum. each with a little handwritten label, and near the register, a simple plaque in honor of Alice Parker for reminding us that roots survive fire. I touched the plaque just once. Then I took a seat near the front window, where the light streamed in like gold. People filtered in, curious and cheerful. Jonah greeted them like old friends. Daniel offered samples. Eliza stood behind the flower counter, tying little ribbons around bouquets of wild daisies. And I watched. I breathed. I belonged. That night, Jonah walked me home. We passed the garden, now alive with early growth. The scent of mint and lilac drifted in the air. He offered his arm. I took it. "I think you won," he said softly. "There was never a game," I replied. "Only survival." He smiled. "Still, you're a hell of a gardener." I looked up at the stars, clear, steady, eternal. "So are you." We stood in silence for a long moment, and I knew this was the life I had earned. Not perfect, not painless, but real, rich, and still unfolding. I was 81. I had been burned. I had been betrayed. And yet, here I stood at the center of my own story. Not its ending, but its beginning.